There is something no one tells you about power, not in school, not in therapy, not even in the quiet conversations between people who actually have it. The truth is brutal and simple. Most people who desperately seek power over others have already been completely controlled by it, long before they ever held any. And the most dangerous game being played around you right now is not the one you can see. It is the one happening inside the minds of people who smile at you every single day. Let that sit for a moment, because if you have ever felt manipulated by someone you trusted, outmaneuvered by someone you underestimated, or quietly diminished by a person who seemed perfectly kind on the surface, what you experienced was not bad luck. It was not a personality clash. It was psychology, cold, precise, and entirely learnable. And understanding it might be the most important thing you ever do. Power in its rawest form is not about money, not about titles, not about who sits at the head of the table. Those are just the visible symptoms of something far more primal. Power is about the ability to shape reality, other people's reality, their perception of themselves, their sense of what is even possible. The philosopher Bertrand Russell once wrote that power is the fundamental concept in social science, in the same way that energy is the fundamental concept in physics. Not love, not justice, power. And yet, most of us are taught almost nothing about how it actually works. There is a reason for that silence. For centuries, the true mechanics of power were preserved as hidden knowledge, passed down through royal courts, military academies, the inner circles of those who understood that information itself is a form of control. When Niccolò Machiavelli published The Prince in 1532, he did not invent new tactics. He committed a crime far worse. He wrote down the tactics that rulers had been using quietly for generations. He was condemned, exiled, and then quietly read by every person who wanted to understand how the world actually operated, because the people who held power never wanted those mechanics visible to everyone else. Now here is the question that matters. Why does any of this concern you? Because these dynamics do not live only in royal courts or boardrooms. They live in your office, in your family, in every relationship you have. The colleague who always seems to emerge from meetings looking brilliant while you leave, feeling somehow confused. The friend who makes you feel slightly inadequate without ever saying anything explicitly cruel. The partner who has a subtle, persistent way of making you doubt your own memory of events. These are not random social frictions. This is the dark psychology of power operating in real time, and most of us were never given the map to read it. Here is where it becomes unsettling. The people deploying these patterns often do not do so consciously. That may be the most disturbing revelation of all. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo conducted the Stanford prison experiment. 24 ordinary, psychologically healthy young men, randomly assigned to be either guards or prisoners in a simulated jail. Within 6 days, the guards were psychologically tormenting the prisoners, not because they were cruel people, but because the system gave them power and no one told them how to hold it. Normal people. Ordinary psychology. Extraordinary cruelty. Not from evil, from unconsciousness. That experiment was shut down early, but the dynamic it revealed never stopped running. It runs in your world, right now. So ask yourself this: have you ever felt powerful? And when you did, what did that power feel like? Was it clean? Or was there something uncomfortable underneath it? Something you have never quite examined? That discomfort is the beginning of everything. If there is one thing that psychology, philosophy, and history agree on, it is this: the relationship between a person and power reveals everything about their inner world. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the part of the psyche we refuse to acknowledge, the desires we dress in acceptable clothing, the hungers we pretend we do not feel. Power is one of the most fertile territories for the shadow to operate, because wanting power is something most people are deeply ashamed of. We are taught it is selfish, dangerous, a character flaw, and so we want it secretly, pursue it indirectly, and then deny it entirely when someone gets close enough to see it. This creates what psychologists call covert power dynamics, and they are everywhere. Think about the person who never asks for anything directly, but creates an atmosphere of guilt so thick that everyone around them bends to their wishes without a single word being spoken. Think about the leader who builds authority, not through inspiration, but through manufacturing dependence, making sure the team can never quite function without them. Think about the person who deploys vulnerability as a weapon, sharing just enough pain to make others feel obligated. bound by an invisible debt that can never quite be repaid. These are not evil people. They are wounded people. People who learned somewhere along the way that asking openly for what they needed led to rejection, or punishment, or humiliation. So they adapted. They found the side door. And those adaptations, repeated long enough, became identity, became personality, became just the way they are. Now here is the psychological truth that almost every conversation about power misses. Control is almost always a response to fear. The executive who micromanages every detail of his team's work is not a tyrant. He is someone terrified of failure, terrified of being exposed as inadequate, terrified of the chaos that lives just beneath the surface of his perfectly ordered world. The person who cuts others down with surgical precision at every social gathering is not confident. They are someone whose sense of self requires constant external confirmation, like a phone that cannot hold its charge and needs to be plugged in every few hours. The one who must win every argument is not strong. They are someone for whom being wrong feels at a deep neurological level like annihilation. Once you see this pattern, you cannot unsee it. And here is the hardest part. Once you see it in others, you will begin, if you are truly honest, to see it in yourself. Because none of us escape childhood without developing our own set of power adaptations. The question is not whether you have them. The question is whether you are awake to them. If this idea is already moving something inside you, if you are turning it over and feeling the edges of it like an unfamiliar stone, imagine what it means to go one layer deeper. This is the kind of knowledge that does not just change how you see others, it changes how you understand yourself. And that shift, that movement from unconscious participant to conscious observer, is where real power actually begins. But there is a secret still deeper than this, one that most people never reach. Most frameworks for understanding power teach you how to use it more effectively, how to be more persuasive, more strategic, more dominant. And there is real value in that tactical knowledge. Do not dismiss it. But the deepest philosophers and psychologists who have studied power across centuries arrived at a different conclusion entirely. Almost unanimously. They found that the most durable, most authentic form of power does not come from learning to control others. It comes from learning to stop being controlled by your own unconscious drives. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about the will to power, but what is consistently misunderstood is that he was not talking about domination over other people. He was talking about the power to become what you truly are, to overcome your own inherited beliefs, your own fear, your own comfortable mediocrity. He was pointing at something that Viktor Frankl later confirmed from the ashes of Auschwitz, that the last human freedom, the one that cannot be taken by any regime, any relationship, any circumstance, is the freedom to choose your response. That is power in its purest form, interior sovereignty. And this is where the dark psychology of power reveals its most important secret. Every manipulation system depends on one thing to function: your unconscious participation. Every dark psychological tactic requires a hook inside you for it to attach to. Guilt tripping only works on someone carrying unresolved guilt. Gaslighting only works on someone who does not fully trust their own perception. Status games only have power over someone whose sense of self-worth lives outside themselves, in other people's opinions, in titles, in comparison. The dark psychology of power is, at its core, a precise map of human psychological vulnerability. And every vulnerability on that map is also, and this is the part that changes everything, a doorway to self-knowledge. When you identify where you are vulnerable to manipulation, you are not cataloging your weaknesses. You are locating your unfinished psychological work. You are finding the places where your inner world is still running on old programming, still executing the survival strategies of a younger, more frightened version of yourself. And you have a choice. Leave that programming running invisibly on autopilot, or look at it directly, with honesty and without self-punishment, and begin the slow, courageous work of rewriting it. The people who do this work become genuinely difficult to manipulate, not because they become cold or closed, but because there is no longer a hook, no unresolved shame for shame-based manipulation to attach to, no desperate need for approval for social pressure to exploit, no fear of being ordinary for status games to leverage. The Stoics called this apatheia, not indifference, but an inner stability so deep that external forces simply lose their grip. Marcus Aurelius practiced this not from a monastery, but from the throne of Rome, surrounded by political betrayal, military crisis, and every conceivable power dynamic imaginable. He wrote his philosophy not to be published, but in a private journal, for himself, because he understood that the only person he ultimately needed to govern was himself. But there is one final revelation, one that lives in the deepest layer of everything we have explored. The people who understand the dark psychology of power most completely, who master it, who study it with the most precision, almost always arrive at the same conclusion. Power over others is ultimately hollow, not just morally questionable, experientially hollow, empty in the very place it was supposed to fill something. The person who claws to the top of a hierarchy and finally arrives there often finds a strange, quiet disorientation waiting for them, because the drive for power over others is a misdirected hunger. It is the hunger for self-mastery aimed in the wrong direction. This is the revelation hidden inside the darkest corners of human psychology. The game that appears to be about controlling others is at its deepest level about the failure to control yourself. And the ones who understand this first, who redirect that energy inward before the world forces the lesson on them, are the ones who become genuinely free. Epictetus was born a slave. No money, no status, no political power, a physical disability that marked him visibly. And yet he is still being read 2,000 years later, because what he understood about inner sovereignty was so precise that no external force could touch it. He said, "Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens." Not resignation, not passivity. A radical, disciplined decision to locate your power exactly where it actually lives, inside. That is the real invitation here. Not to become manipulative, not to dominate rooms or outmaneuver rivals, though knowing the game has its place. The deeper invitation is to look clearly at the power dynamics moving through your life, to recognize where you have been unconsciously participating in games you never agreed to play, and to decide, consciously, deliberately, who you want to be inside those dynamics. The dark psychology of power is only dark for those who cannot see it. Once you can see it, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a mirror, one of the most honest mirrors the human psyche can look into. Look into it. What you find there might disturb you, it might surprise you, and if you sit with it long enough, it might finally, after a very long time, set you free. If this video opened a door you didn't know was there, share it with someone who needs to hear this. Not because you want to grow a channel, but because some ideas are too large to live in just one mind. Leave a comment with one pattern you recognized in yourself. And if you want to continue this journey, the next video goes even deeper.